Coyote attacks are considered extremely rare. When they do occur, the victims are usually small children and the injuries are typically limited to minor bites. That's the narrative repeated by wildlife experts. But the story of Taylor Mitchell, a 19-year-old rising folk singer, challenges nearly every part of that assumption. Did what happened to her demand a different understanding entirely? Let's get into it. Long before her name reached stages and streaming platforms, before she set foot on coastal trails alone with a guitar-shaped heart, she was Taylor Josephine Stephanie Lucio, a girl from Toronto with a hunger for beauty and a mind that translated solitude into song. Raised in a home where music was both a comfort and a rebellion, she learned to play guitar on her father's old Yamaha and wrote lyrics in the margins of her textbooks. Her voice was soft but magnetic, the kind that made silence lean in to listen. The city's folk scene took notice of her early on, not for flashy performances, but for the raw ache that clung to her words. By her late teens, she had redefined herself. She took the stage name Taylor Mitchell, and under that name she released her debut album, For Your Consideration. It wasn't loud, it didn't chart, but it mattered. Each track moved like a diary entry, sparse and soul-bared. Critics called it haunting, fans called it honest. One listener said it felt like a conversation between strangers who understand each other. The Canadian Folk Music Awards took notice. In the fall of 2009, Mitchell received a nomination in the New Emerging Artist category. She booked a small tour of the Maritimes, intimate venues, community centers, coffee shops that double as concert halls. Sydney, Nova Scotia was her next stop, but before that, she wanted to walk. Apart from music, Mitchell had always sought out wild places, trails, forests, rocky shorelines where she could be alone with her thoughts. Nature had a tempo. It gave her melodies. And on October 27, 2009, she parked her rental car near the Skyline Trail in Petit Etang, Cape Breton Highlands National Park. The afternoon sun shimmered gold over the horizon. It was her kind of day. Quiet, radiant, a sky full of clarity. She stepped out of the car, zipped her hoodie against the wind, and tightened the laces of her boots. A silver keyring glinted in her fingers, car keys and a tiny Swiss Army knife. It had followed her from province to province, a pocket-sized shield, more ritual than weapon. She brushed back a lock of dark hair and looked at the trailhead. Mitchell walked with deliberate steps, her boots crunching through fallen leaves. The trail led toward a sweeping overlook of the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Few places felt this wide open. Few places felt this still. She passed a middle-aged couple, Americans, who nodded politely as they walked by. Mitchell offered a soft, distant smile in return, already drifting into the quiet interior of a melody she'd been shaping in her mind. The lyrics circled the theme of isolation, not as loneliness but as liberation. Her steps slowed. She paused briefly to take in the way the late afternoon light curled like gold thread along the tops of the trees, a hush hanging in the air. At 3:02 p.m., just 6 minutes after Mitchell had crossed paths with the couple, another pair of hikers, Mike and Gail, also from the U.S., noticed something strange ahead. Two coyotes, unflinching and assertive, were approaching them directly on the trail. Mike instinctively raised his camera and took a picture, expecting them to startle and retreat. They didn't. One of the coyotes held his gaze, calm and defiant, as if daring him to try something. Gail reached for his jacket sleeve and tugged. "Let's get out of here," she whispered urgently. They began walking faster towards the parking lot. Later they would describe how the coyotes moved, not timidly, not cautiously, but like they owned the trail. 6 minutes later, Mitchell encountered them. What happened next was unclear, but has been pieced together from witness accounts, fragments of sound, and the haunting aftermath. Maybe she saw the animals in the distance and froze. Maybe she instinctively turned to retrace her steps. Perhaps she held her ground, unsure what to do. But something changed in the air, an invisible shift from passive to predatory. The coyotes didn't flee. They advanced, deliberate and alert. She may have tried to shout, hoping noise would drive them off. She might have slowly backed away, trying not to provoke them. At some point, she may have reached for the small knife she carried. Then came a scream, sharp, piercing, and unnatural, that tore through the still air like a snapped guitar string. Mike and Gail, now within sight of the gravel parking lot, froze in place. It wasn't the call of a bird or the cry of any woodland creature they recognized. It was too long, too human, too full of pain. Was that an animal? Mike asked, eyes narrowing, uncertainty clouding his voice. No, Gail said without hesitation. Her feet were already moving faster, her instincts kicking in. Whatever it wasn't right. They reached the edge of the lot where a battered, half-forgotten payphone stood, its paint faded. Neither of them had noticed it earlier, but now it seemed like the only tether to the world beyond the woods. Gail picked up the receiver, her hands trembling as she dialed. There was no time to wonder or assume. Something terrible had just happened. She could feel it. At that same moment, 4 hikers approached the trailhead of the Skyline Trail. 2 men and 2 women, all experienced, their backpacks snug against their shoulders, water bottles clipped to their belts. They were expecting a scenic walk, not a crisis. But as soon as someone mentioned the scream and the urgency in the air, they knew this wasn't a trail to be admired today. This was something else. They didn't wait. No hesitation. They picked up pace along the access road, boots crunching against gravel and loose dirt, eyes darting from side to side. The trail ahead, normally serene and inviting, now felt unnaturally still, as if holding its breath. They didn't know exactly what they were walking toward, only that they were needed. A few minutes into the walk, they began noticing the signs. Small things, scattered but wrong. A keychain lying in the middle of the path. A tiny folding knife, its blade scratched and open, glinting in the sunlight. These weren't just lost belongings, they were desperate signs of resistance. Further up the trail, the woods opened slightly into a clearing at the trailhead. What they saw stopped them in their tracks. Pieces of torn clothing were strewn across the ground like abandoned rags. Streaks of red soaked the earth in erratic patterns. A dense pool of blood spread in the grass, still fresh. One of them pointed toward a washroom building. On the pale metal door, dark handprints smeared across the surface. The group surged forward. Their hearts thundered now. They called out and listened. Nothing. Then they moved past the washroom, into the woods just beyond. There, among the roots of a stand of low trees, they saw her. Mitchell lay crumbled in the underbrush, partially hidden by branches and leaves. Her body was curled, barely moving. Standing above her was a coyote, its fur bristled, its muzzle wet and stained. It didn't bolt at the sight of them. Instead, it turned and locked eyes with the intruders, growling deep and slow, a warning rumble in its throat. Without pause, the men in the group advanced. They shouted, raised their arms, broke branches from nearby trees and waved them, swinging wildly. But the animal didn't retreat like a frightened scavenger. It backed off slowly, deliberately, circling just beyond reach as if waiting. Mitchell's eyes fluttered open. She was conscious, barely. Her gaze was distant, glassy with shock and pain, but she could speak. Faint words tumbled out, broken, confused. She was covered in blood, her shirt and jeans soaked through. The earth beneath her darkened as it absorbed more. Bites ran across her limbs and torso, deep, ragged wounds that exposed muscle and left bone close beneath the skin. One leg was especially mangled, and her head had taken a blow or a bite that left a wide gash across the scalp. Her breaths were shallow and fast, like she was running a race she'd never chosen to enter. The hikers formed a loose shield around her, one keeping watch on the circling coyote, the others checking her injuries with what little medical training they had. The tension broke only when an officer from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police arrived and fired a shotgun at the animal, finally driving it into the woods. Paramedics arrived soon after and stabilized her as best they could before rushing her to Sacred Heart Community Health Center in Cheticamp. There, a medevac team prepared her for airlift to Queen Elizabeth II Health Sciences Center in Halifax. Despite their efforts, Mitchell succumbed to massive blood loss. she was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. She was just 19 years old. Mitchell's parents, Emily and Ray Lucio, flew to Halifax to retrieve their daughter's body. She was buried in Greenwood Cemetery in Owen Sound, Ontario. The news stunned the country. For those who had witnessed it, for the hikers who had found her, the officer who had fired the shotgun, the paramedics who raced against blood loss, the image of a young woman lying broken and conscious under the pine canopy would remain burned into memory. For the public, the horror was difficult to process. A fatal coyote attack? In Canada? Such incidents were virtually unheard of. The media swarmed to Petit-Étang. Nova Scotia officials sealed the Skyline Trail and called in wildlife specialists. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Infrared trackers were deployed. Rangers moved with rifles in hand through the thickets of Cape Breton Highlands National Park, eyes sharp for any sign of movement. The question on everyone's mind was simple. Why had this happened? Speculation came fast, from experts and laypeople alike. Some wildlife biologists wondered if the coyotes had been hybridized, perhaps larger and more aggressive due to breeding with wolves or domestic dogs. Others feared the possibility of rabies, or that the animals had been starving in the remote terrain and turned to human prey out of desperation. But these claims were never substantiated. Autopsies and behavior analyses ruled out starvation, rabies, or hybridization as primary factors. Instead, researchers arrived at a more troubling possibility, that the coyotes had simply lost their fear of humans. Brent Patterson, a research scientist from the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources, studied photos taken by Mike just before the attack. He pointed to the strange behavior, unafraid, dominant, calculating. These coyotes were not merely desperate, they were bold. That same coyote, forensic evidence would later show, was the one seen standing over Mitchell's bloodied body in the trees. Within hours of the attack, Nova Scotia's Parks Canada deployed wardens to locate and eliminate the pack believed responsible. The trail was closed indefinitely, blocked off with signs warning of heightened animal aggression. The washroom near the clearing was cordoned off, blood still smeared on its door handle. The next day, a female coyote behaving aggressively near the site was shot and killed by a park warden. Over the next week, 3 more coyotes were caught in leg-hold traps set near the trail. One was dispatched just over a kilometer from where Mitchell had fallen. Then, on November 14th, 18 days after the attack, a large male coyote was tracked and killed roughly 5 kilometers away. Post-mortem analysis confirmed what many feared. 3 of the killed coyotes, 2 males and 1 female, had Mitchell's blood on their coats and in their stomach contents. The large male, weighing in at 42 pounds, was identified as the dominant animal in Mike's photograph, and the same coyote shot at by the RCMP constable during the rescue. Shotgun pellets were found embedded in its flesh. The 3 were likely members of the same family unit. The female and the large male were believed to be a breeding pair. The third coyote, smaller, younger, was genetically related. Together they had stalked and cornered Mitchell, driving her back up the trail and into the clearing. Behind the news stories and the debates, Mitchell's family was enduring a grief so vast that it couldn't be explained by headlines or science. In a statement released days after the attack, her mother Emily Lucio made a plea for perspective. "We take a calculated risk when spending time in nature's fold," she wrote. "It's the wildlife's terrain." Her words struck a nerve. Amidst the fear and vengeance, Mitchell's mother called for understanding. Her daughter, who had sung to trees and hiked alone to think clearly, wouldn't have wanted her legacy to be one of death. The Canadian Folk Music Awards honored her posthumously in December 2009. In the soft lighting of the gala, amidst guitars and slow fiddle reels, Mitchell's name was read aloud as Young Performer of the Year. Her EP and album were re-released by her label with all proceeds directed to a memorial fund. Her songs, gentle, probing, uncertain in all the right ways, were aired across CBC Radio, tributes paid by fellow artists and DJs alike. She had never finished a second album, but her lyrics, often described as searching without reaching, spoke more loudly after her death than they had in life. The Skyline Trail, once a popular stop for tourists hoping to spot moose or catch a sunset over the cliffs, took on a somber reputation. While still open to hikers, the area was dotted with new warning signs. Avoid hiking alone. Do not feed wildlife. Stay alert. Carry protection. In 2013, a documentary titled Bad Coyote was released, partially centered on Mitchell's death and the unsettling expansion of coyote habitat into human territory across Atlantic Canada. The film blended scientific investigation with ethical questions. When does wildness become a threat? And who bears the cost? But perhaps Mitchell's most lasting legacy came not through policy or warning signs, but through art and education. In the year following her death, her mother launched the Taylor Mitchell Legacy Trust. The trust, in partnership with the David Suzuki Foundation, aimed to do what Mitchell herself might have done: create something healing from tragedy. Its mission was twofold: to support young people in musical and creative expression, and to fund education on wildlife coexistence. The Trust hosted songwriting workshops, funded youth artist grants, and ran outreach programs teaching children about respecting natural habitats. Emily spoke at conferences. She wasn't a scientist, but she carried the weight of her daughter's absence with a kind of grace that disarmed rooms. She would tell them about Taylor's love for hiking, her passion for questions, her insistence on walking alone not because she was reckless, but because she was listening. Over time, Mitchell's music reached audiences beyond her original listeners. Her song Fall Into Me was used in a short film about environmental awareness. Even a line from one of her poems was carved into a bench along a Toronto nature trail. There is no edge I fear if I walk it with wonder. In Cape Breton, the wilderness slowly healed. Coyotes returned as they always do, but so did understanding. Rangers began running guided talks along popular trails, educating visitors on animal behavior and human responsibility. Hazing protocols were tested, signage made clear. Years have passed, but Taylor Mitchell's story endures, not just as a tragedy, but as a compass for how we move through the natural world.